Getting customers to talk about your brand. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. Some of the world's most talked about brands are owned by companies who spend little on traditional advertising. Instead of running expensive ads to drive sales, they become talkable brands through deliberate decisions baked into offline and online word-of-mouth marketing from day one. This week on Thoughtful China, we'll find out how to build word of mouth, while our own PT Black will tackle the credibility challenge in China. But first, with us is Marie Han Siloway, Chief of Marketing at Starbucks China. Marie, Starbucks has built its brand in China through word of mouth, much like it did in the US. However, China's digital ecosystem is very different from the US. There's no Facebook here, there's no Twitter, and even platforms like Sina Weibo are quite different from their counterparts in the US. So how has Starbucks adapted its global strategy to work in China?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that in China, we probably have the most active internet netizens in the world. And one of the things that we need to keep aware of is that, consumers here, they make a choice on their brands, not just based on sort of their personal preferences, but what their friends think is actually quite important. And now it's like expanded to this whole social community. It's like what your community thinks is also really important. So for example, we have an extremely active community on Weibo, as well as Renren Kaixinwang. But I would say that on Weibo is actually probably the most active space for us.
And you're speaking specifically of Sina Weibo or Tenshin's Weibo?
Sina Weibo, that's right, that's right.
And does your strategy change as you move outside of first-tier cities in terms of how you communicate with your community?
Well, of course it does when it comes to in-store communication, but when you look at online and the digital space, it really cuts across borders. So it doesn't matter if you're in Hefei or Changsha or Shanghai now. Everyone is connected in the same digital space, and so we don't really have to adapt based on tiers from that standpoint.
So what are some of your favorite social applications in China?
So I would have to say that there's a couple of things happening that I'm very fascinated by. One is just sort of around QR codes and interactive, and I don't think that that's unique to any particular brand, but I think that many companies have been looking at interactive communication and payment systems, and so I think that's really fascinating here for China because that's not something that's been done yet on a broad scale. So, and I think the other area is just frankly how influential the whole digital community can be on your brands, on the consumer confidence level, on how they look at you. And it's not like that anywhere in the world.
And you mentioned Weibo being a very influential platform for you in terms of engaging your community. What about other platforms, video or search? Are you utilizing any of those?
Yeah, I mean, of course we use all of those, right? Just like anybody else. But I think one of the most influential or impactful programs that we've launched is actually our loyalty program, which is it's a loyalty card program, and we've linked it with the digital space and a website, and that's been extremely, extremely impactful with our consumer base.
Now the loyalty card program, though, doesn't transfer necessarily from coast to coast in China, right? Are there certain restrictions by territory?
Oh, so you're a Starbucks user, you've done your homework.
Yes.
So starting February 14th, you can use it all over China.
Oh, thank goodness, because I bought one last year and I was actually quite upset that I couldn't use it outside of Beijing.
You'll need to get one this year.
So in terms of offline engagement, I mean, how do you link that up with your online activities?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways. So for example, this year we had this amazing kickoff to our Christmas promotion where we actually tapped into, we had basically a private sale night for our loyalty card members, and this was actually marketed online as well. On our site and Sina Weibo, but then what that translated it to was actually in key markets around China. We had invited consumers to come. It was a private sale night where they could actually have first pick of our Christmas merchandise selection and be the first to try our Christmas beverages. And it was amazing because by the end of the evening, we had so many spontaneous posts from consumers and retweets and saying, hurry, you have to get down here. And so all of our Christmas merchandise was just completely almost sold out of that one batch just in one night.
Thanks, Marie. And now PT Black will share a thought or two about brand credibility from a consumer perspective.
No matter what country you're in, good word of mouth is crucial for brand success. But in China, it's especially important. There are two reasons why. First, China is a low-trust society. That means people here are generally skeptical. They avoid strangers, they steer clear of institutions, and they always lock their doors. People are suspicious of brands as well, and take nothing for granted. Chinese shoppers even plug in and test a purchase before leaving the store. The second factor is Chinese media, which is neither neutral nor independent. It doesn't play a watchdog role, and hardly observes a distinction between advertising and editorial. This is true both on and offline. Observers joke that popular young blogger Han Han may be the only independent voice in the entire country. So word of mouth becomes inevitable. Where else can shoppers turn but to each other? That explains the massive volume of brand reviews and product experiences that fill Chinese bulletin boards. This is a great opportunity for some brands, especially those that pay close attention to consumer touchpoints like retail and after-sales service. But there is a threat on the horizon. Increasing numbers of brands seem to be resorting to shady techniques in an attempt to influence their reputation online. Instead of solving real problems, they try to drown out valid consumer complaints or implant artificial praises. It's dishonest, unimaginative, and often very heavy-handed. It's also degrading the real conversations that are online and leads to short tempers and coarse dialogue. What's more, it makes people here even more suspicious, which isn't good news for anybody.
Thanks, PT. With me now is Asit Gupta, CEO of Advocacy Asia, Eugene Chu, Digital Strategy Director at JWT Shanghai, and Sam Fleming, Chairman and Founder of CIC. Today we're talking about engaging customers, where they're exchanging views and opinions about brands offline and online. So, where do you think the strength of word of mouth really lies in China? Is it online or is it offline? Is there a growing trend in either of these territories?
Well, I would say it begins with online because of the way that offline media is censored. So when something bad happens, people will go online to talk about it. And given the immediacy of mobile applications tied to like Weibo and now Weixin, you can see that the way that news travels very fast means that online is where you'll find a treasure trove of what Chinese people are really thinking.
Before we get into the discussion of offline versus online, I think the bigger challenge in front of marketeers who get excited about word of mouth is not really understanding where it is happening, but really how do you go about creating word of mouth? Because that's what's interesting for them. How do I create word of mouth? Where consumers do word of mouth is going to be a function of their natural habitat and the access to web.
One thing that brands forget is you need to have something, give them something to talk about. Yes. Because I think when brands jump to digital, saying I want to create word of mouth or internet word of mouth, oftentimes it will be for a shampoo or for a toothpaste, right, which inherently no one talks about shampoo or toothpaste really unless there's something to talk about. So I think that that's something that you have to remember as well.
So can you share some of the other learnings that you've gained from a year of managing communities for brands in China?
Traditional marketing approach has always been campaign-led. You have a new product or you have a new packaging and you come up with a relaunch campaign and you go on air. It was the burst strategy. But when you're doing a word-of-mouth campaign and you want consumers to act as your media, you have to have a slightly different approach. So what I tell people that community management is like contact sports. It's long-term relationship. You can't switch off like you can do in a campaign, because you can't switch off and then go back 6 months to a community and say, okay, let's now do this. They will say, hello, where were you? Like I didn't hear from you in between. So community management is fundamentally different from campaign management. Both are integral to marketing, but it's a slightly different skill. And people are still coming round to that, saying you need to keep nurturing the community, keep feeding them stuff about your brand, to keep them engaged and warm. So that's a pretty important learning.
How would you guys think to help, whether it's a lifestyle product or fashion even, where you're not going to send out necessarily 100,000 outfits? How would you approach something like that that's less direct?
Well, I think the other way is to look at what's happening in culture. And there's a really great theory around marketing at the speed of culture, which is looking at cultural events, news events, in pop-up kind of flash in the pan internet memes and just jumping on them and commenting on them in a way that brings your brand into the forefront of the conversation. So like when there was a big dust storm in Sydney, Visa pushed out this ad the same day that said, "Go to a car wash with Visa," and showed a dusty car. And the same way when President Obama said that they didn't have a dog for the White House, Pedigree ran ads asking him to adopt a dog instead of buying a dog. So there's many clever ways that you can use what's the trending topic on Weibo, for example, to get your brand talked about.
What other brands are being talked about the most in China, according to your data?
Well, I think you know, some brands, I mean, kind of sticking to luxury, I think some brands don't have to work very hard at word of mouth. They just inherently have that. I think brands like Chanel, we did a luxury white paper looking at the social space in luxury, and you know, Chanel just dominates the buzz in terms of just mentions, and yet Chanel has very few. Very little. I don't think they have anything doing anything in social media. They do very little engagement at all, and but it has such a powerful heritage and such a powerful brand in China that people just naturally are talking about it. I think Apple is another one. You know, I think the way that they are the DNA of Apple is that it's very secretive. You don't know what's really coming up. So there's always lots of rumors about when is the next iPhone coming out? What are the features going to be? The features themselves, like the voice recognition, things like that, are all very worthy. And so I think that it's those brands and in those sectors which have, I think, more natural word of mouth.
And do you separate the positive word of mouth versus the negative word of mouth? Because there might be a brand that's frequently mentioned, but
sure.
It's because people are saying it's terrible. Whether, you know,
oh, sure. I mean, I think that certainly during a crisis time, like more recently, like Mengyo or some of the milk, the dairy brands, get caught up in a crisis, and their word of mouth or their IWOM will skyrocket, but not for the right reasons. And then you have some other issues that I would say, more chronic word of mouth issues about that just linger. Like one is for like the auto industry, for Japanese cars. Mm-hmm. You ask just about any Chinese consumer, top of mind when they think about Japanese cars, what do they think about? That it's poor quality, that the cars sold in China are purposely poor quality. The metal, the chassis is thinner than other markets. The paint is cheaper, and we have verified that this perception, right? We collect 15 million comments every month about cars from Chinese social media, and you can see that is a concept that persists. Or cola, that cola melts your bones, and you can see that is really bad. I mean, that's really evident. That perception exists. So I think those are some of I'd say the scarier, or for certain industries or certain brands, the persistent negative word of mouth, I think is.
And Eugene, what are some of the biggest mistakes you think marketers make when they're trying to take advantage of WOM-worthy ideas, or trying to deploy what they think are WOM-worthy ideas?
I think going into this kind of word-of-mouth marketing, you have to anticipate that there will be these kind of PR crises and have contingency plans about what you're going to do if, for example, your car actually catches on fire and then it's replicated. So I think the biggest mistake is that marketers, when they get into a crisis, their first reaction may be to try and delete that stuff or to flood it off the screen. But I would advise caution in actually trying to be more genuine in engaging the people that experience the problem. And quite often that is best done through key opinion leaders.
So Eugene, you mentioned key opinion leaders before as being very key influencers in China. Who are some of these key opinion leaders?
Right now on Weibo, I would say it's actresses like Yang Mi and Yao Chen. But that's the celebrity end of the scale. But when you're doing word-of-mouth marketing, you're also interested in more like niche communities or people who have subject matter expertise that may not necessarily have millions of fans, but they have a great deal of influence within a particular area. So people like that might be Hong Huang, who's the Elle fashion editor, and Wen Yi, who's a mum, but she's also a great chef. And so if you're doing things for mums or with food products, she's a great KOL to work with.
Asit, Eugene, Sam, thanks for being on Thoughtful China. That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Tudo and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter and join our LinkedIn group. We'll see you again.